In Texas, once known as the execution capital of America, more than 580 death row inmates have been executed since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. No other state comes close to that number, and nowhere else do the stories behind bars echo so hauntingly through the halls of justice. The names on this list aren't just criminals. They're the faces behind some of the most brutal and unforgettable crimes in Texas history. Their actions left deep scars on families, communities, and on the conscience of a state that has never looked away from justice, no matter how grim. Have you ever wondered what runs through a person's mind in the final moments of their life? What do they choose as their last meal? And what, if anything, do they say before the silence? Let's take a closer look at the final chapters of these lives. First, Pablo Lucio Vasquez, Texas. On the night of April 18, 1998, in the small working-class town of Donna, nestled in the Rio Grande Valley near the Texas-Mexico border, a quiet house party was underway. It was nothing out of the ordinary, just another gathering of teenagers surrounded by music, laughter, and heat. Among those in attendance were 20-year-old Pablo Lucio Vasquez and his 15-year-old cousin, both described as quiet, withdrawn. When the party ended, they left with a 12-year-old boy named David Cardenas. At first, it seemed like nothing. But what followed would become one of the darkest stories that town had ever known. The next day, David's body was discovered in a vacant lot, hastily buried beneath dry brush. Police quickly tracked down Vasquez, and within days, he was under arrest. In his confession, Vasquez admitted to killing the boy and revealed details so disturbing that even the courtroom chose not to speak them aloud. David's mother refused to attend that part of the hearing. Her words were simple: "We don't need to hear the details to know our son is gone forever." Vasquez was sentenced to death soon after, but the appeals process stretched on for nearly 20 years, focusing on his age, upbringing, and mental health. None of it changed the outcome. On April 6, 2016, at Huntsville Prison, Vasquez was served his final meal: Salisbury steak, steamed rice with brown gravy, mixed vegetables, sweet peas, ranch-style beans, sliced bread, and a fudgy brownie. He was offered water, iced tea, or fruit punch to drink, a warm, home-style meal in sharp contrast to the horror of his past. Before the injection, Vasquez said quietly, "This is the only way I can be forgiven. You have your justice here today." No one from David's family responded, but that silence spoke louder than any words, because justice, even when it arrives, can never return a child to his mother's arms. Second, Peter Anthony Cantu, Texas. On the night of June 24, 1993, Houston was heavy with summer humidity. In a quiet park, a group of teenage boys gathered, drinking beer and laughing loudly, as if nothing in the world could touch them. That same night, two girls, 14-year-old Jennifer Ertman and 16-year-old Elizabeth Pena, were walking home, taking a shortcut through that very park. They didn't know they had only minutes left before fate turned sharply against them. Without warning, they stepped straight into a group of boys looking for a reason to prove themselves. Boys who had no idea the choices they were about to make would change so many lives forever. Peter Cantu, just 18 at the time, was the ringleader. And for the next several hours, those two young girls never had a chance to go home again. The crime shook not just Houston, but the entire state of Texas. It wasn't just the violence. It was the coldness, the disregard for life, and the way the group acted as if nothing they did had consequences. Cantu and several others were sentenced to death. But what people remember most isn't just the horror of that night. It's what happened afterward. Jennifer's and Elizabeth's families fought to change Texas law, and they did. From that point on, victim families were allowed to witness executions firsthand. On August 17, 2010, Peter Cantu entered the execution chamber at Huntsville Prison. There were no tears, no appeals, no words. His final meal was simple: fajitas, enchiladas, and a cinnamon roll. Mexican comfort food, served without fanfare. When asked if he had any final words, he answered with just one: no. One word, one silence. And maybe the only thing left of a youth lost to darkness. Third, Ronald Clark O'Brien, Texas. Halloween night, 1974. Deer Park, Texas. A crisp fall breeze couldn't dim the excitement of children going door to door for candy. Among them was 8-year-old Timothy, smiling, holding tightly to his bag of treats. No one could have imagined that night would become one of the darkest chapters in American criminal history. Ronald Clark O'Brien, Timothy's father, had taken him trick-or-treating with other neighborhood kids. But just hours after they got home, Timothy began convulsing. He died later that night. An autopsy revealed that one of the pixie sticks he had eaten was laced with cyanide, and the person responsible was the man he trusted most, his own father. Ronald had taken out a $20,000 life insurance policy on his son. To cover his tracks, he distributed the same poison candy to 4 other children. Thankfully, none of them ate it. The media called him the Candy Man, a name soaked in irony and horror. Parents were terrified. Halloween changed forever. On March 31st, 1984, O'Brien was executed at Huntsville Prison. For his last meal, he requested a full plate, a well-done T-bone steak, French fries with ketchup, corn, sweet peas, a salad with French dressing, dinner rolls, Boston cream pie, and iced tea. But by then, no one cared what he ate. When asked for his final statement, he delivered a long, dramatic speech. "What is about to transpire in a few moments is wrong. I would forgive all who have taken part in any way in my death. To my loved ones, I extend my undying love." But no speech could bring Timothy back. No carefully chosen words could ease the pain of those who lost a child, a grandchild, a brother. 4th, Kenneth Allen McDuff, Texas. It was a late August afternoon in 1966 on a quiet rural railroad between 2 small Texas towns. 3 high school students had just left school. A car pulled up beside them. Behind the wheel was a man in his early 20s, Kenneth Allen McDuff. Maybe he offered a ride, maybe it was just an excuse. But from the moment they approached that car, their lives were pulled down a path they would never return from. Police later found the bodies of 2 teenage boys abandoned in a field. Nearby, they discovered the lifeless body of Edna Sullivan, just 16 years old. The brutality of the crime shook the entire state. McDuff, only 20 years old at the time, was arrested along with an accomplice named Roy Green. He was sentenced to death, and for a while, Texans believed justice had been served. But then, over 2 decades later, came a decision that would haunt the system. In 1989, McDuff was paroled after his sentence was reduced due to prison overcrowding. It wasn't long before women began disappearing, women who lived alone or worked late shifts. Within 3 years of his release, McDuff was suspected in at least 6 murders, including the killing of Melissa Northrup, a pregnant convenience store clerk. He was arrested again in 1992 and put on trial a second time. This time, the sentence was carried out with no delays. On November 17, 1998, McDuff entered the execution chamber at Huntsville Prison. He didn't appeal, he didn't ask for mercy. His final meal request was 2 well-done T-bone steaks, served with the usual sides. Instead, he was given a hamburger, plain, standard, nothing more. When asked for his final words, McDuff said quietly, "I'm ready to be released. Release me." A short sentence. Perhaps a confession, perhaps surrender, or maybe just a final whisper into the darkness he once brought upon others. 5th, Keith Bernard Clay, Texas. On January 4th, 1994, just 10 days after Christmas, Houston was still reeling from a string of violent crimes. Then came another, a robbery at a small convenience store on the southwest side of the city. That night, the clerk on duty was Melithethel Varugese, an immigrant from India, working to support his family. According to security footage and witness accounts, he didn't resist. But Keith Bernard Clay, 26 years old at the time, pulled the trigger anyway, killing him for just a few $100s from the register. The Varugese family never got to say goodbye. The city's immigrant community was stunned. People said Mr. Varugese was kind, always smiling at customers, even when working late-night shifts during the New Year holiday. Clay was arrested within the week. With strong evidence and witness testimony, the trial didn't take long. He was sentenced to death soon after. On March 20th, 2003, Clay entered the execution chamber. Unlike many inmates who request something simple, he went big. 4 pieces of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, 2 quarts of ice cream, a bacon cheeseburger, and 2 cans of vanilla Coke. A meal that felt like a reward, though no one cared anymore what he wanted. Before the injection, Clay turned toward the victim's family and spoke gently. "I'm sorry to the victim's family for the pain I've caused. I pray for forgiveness and peace for everyone. Whether sincere or not, his words couldn't bring back the kind-hearted man they had lost. 6th, Anko Maturino Resendes, Texas. On June 27, 2006, at Huntsville Prison in Texas, Anko Maturino Resendes, known as the Railroad Killer, walked into the execution chamber. Infamous for his brutal murders along railroad tracks, Resendes became a nightmare for several states, from Texas to Kentucky and Illinois. Between 1986 and 1999, he killed at least 15 people, often innocent victims living near railroad tracks. His crimes were not just acts of murder, they were cold, calculated, and brutal. He used heavy objects like rocks and pickaxes to end his victims' lives. A man who left behind a decade-long string of terror, spreading fear throughout the communities he targeted. On the day of his execution, Resendes declined a final meal, perhaps because he had nothing left to hope for. When asked if he had any last words, he spoke with a tone of deep regret. "I want to ask, is there any place in your heart to forgive me? You don't have to. I know I let the devil rule my life. I just ask you to forgive me and ask God to forgive me for letting the devil deceive me. I thank God for being patient with me. I don't deserve to cause you pain. You don't deserve this. I deserve what I'm receiving." A statement filled with remorse. But can remorse truly erase the crimes he committed? He left without giving closure to the victims who died. What remained were unanswered questions about justice and forgiveness. 7. Shaka Sanka, Texas. On June 22, 2000 at Huntsville Prison in Texas, Shaka Sanka, born Gerald Lee Graham, faced his execution after spending over 19 years on death row. Convicted of murder in 1981, Sanka never admitted to his crime. He was accused of killing 53-year-old Bobby Grant Lambert in the parking lot of a Safeway store in Houston. But was he really the murderer or a victim of injustice? Sankofa's case drew widespread attention, with many people claiming he was wrongfully convicted. Incomplete evidence, vague testimonies, and a flawed legal system made him a symbol of injustice. He was seen as an innocent man, placed on trial by a justice system that many believe was deeply flawed. The questions surrounding the accuracy of his conviction remain unanswered to this day. When faced with the final moments of his life, Sankofa refused to participate in the last meal ritual, an action that not everyone takes. And when asked for his final words, he delivered a cold, defiant statement. "This is a legal lynching, genocide in America. The revolution will continue." There was no apology, no remorse. His final words seemed to reaffirm his resistance, his disagreement with a legal system he viewed as unjust. Sankofa left without calling for forgiveness, but instead issued a declaration of war against the society that had condemned him. 8. Ronald Keith Aldridge, Texas. In 1976, at just 15 years old, Ronald Aldridge brought a gun to school in Fort Worth, Texas. One student was killed. Ronald was arrested and sentenced to 10 years in juvenile custody. People believed that with time, he could change, that a second chance might still mean something. But that hope didn't last long. 9 years later, on March 25, 1985, Ronald, now 24, picked up a gun again. This time, it was during a robbery at a Whataburger in Fort Worth. A 19-year-old female customer was shot and killed as Ronald tried to take control of the restaurant. The crime was quick, but its aftermath was permanent. The young woman never made it home. Ronald was arrested just days later. In court, his past was brought back into focus. He had once been given a second chance and chose to return to the same violent path. This time, the sentence was death, and no one stood up to plead for mercy. On June 8, 1995, Ronald Aldridge walked into the execution chamber at Huntsville. He refused a final meal. He left no messages, no final look. When asked for any last words, he simply said, "No, I have nothing to say." A quiet end, and the closing of a life that never quite found its way back from what happened at 15. 9. Wayne Westbrook, Texas. On November 13, 1997, in Channelview, a small town east of Houston, Wayne Westbrook arrived at his ex-wife's home, Gloria Jean Coons, hoping to reconcile their fractured relationship. However, when he arrived, he discovered that Ms. Coons was hosting a party with friends and engaging in sexual activities with 2 other men. In a fit of rage and a sense of betrayal, Westbrook left and returned with a shotgun. This time, he didn't just confront his ex-wife. He unleashed a bloody massacre, shooting and killing her along with 4 others at the scene. This murder didn't just shock Ms. Kuhn's family, it horrified the entire community. The brutality of the act wasn't just about the killing, but the way Westbrook let his anger overpower his reason, resulting in the lives of 5 people being taken, including those who had no personal connection to him. The tragedy, particularly with Christmas fast approaching, added a deep layer of sorrow and outrage in the hearts of those left behind. After his arrest, Westbrook was sentenced to death. Throughout his time in prison, he never sought to have his sentence reconsidered, and his attitude toward life behind bars remained one of regret, without ever making excuses for his actions. On March 9, 2016, Westbrook was led to the execution chamber at Huntsville, contrary to the brutal crime he committed. His final meal was simple and reminiscent of a family dinner. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans, black beans, sliced bread, and an orange. A meal so ordinary, like a family dinner, he would never have again. When asked if he had any final words, Westbrook looked at his family and friends, speaking slowly and gently. "I want to say that I'm sorry for the pain I've caused everyone. I'm sorry for not being able to bring everyone back. I wish things could have been different." These were the late apologies of a man facing death, but they couldn't ease the pain he caused those who had lost loved ones. 10. Henry Lee Lucas, Texas. Henry Lee Lucas was one of the most controversial death row inmates in Texas history. With claims that he had killed over 600 people, Lucas became a symbol of delusion and dishonesty. Although most of his confessions were later dismissed as false, Lucas was convicted of killing his mother in 1960 and 2 other individuals in 1983. He was seen as a serial killer, but the truth remains unclear. Did he actually kill so many people, or was he simply a liar? He was arrested in 1984 and convicted of killing his mother and several other victims. However, his confessions, especially about people he wasn't convicted of killing, sparked widespread debate. He claimed to be a serial killer, but his confessions were not verified, and there was no concrete evidence to prove their truth. On March 12, 2001, Lucas died not by execution, but from congestive heart failure at the Ellis Unit Prison in Huntsville, Texas. Unlike many other death row inmates, Lucas refused to request a special final meal. Instead, he accepted the standard last meal for Texas inmates at the time: rice, beans, bread, and water. This action by Lucas seemed to signal a cold, indifferent attitude toward anything other than the death awaiting him. When asked for his final words, Lucas showed no remorse, responding with a short, blunt sentence that offered no forgiveness for his actions. "I don't have anything to say. You can proceed, Warden Jones." A cold, uncaring statement, offering no reflection on the crimes he committed. A quiet end to a life full of lies and brutal acts. 11th. Gerald Lee Mitchell, Texas. Houston, summer of 1985. What began as a small drug deal between 3 young men turned into a string of irreversible violence. Gerald Mitchell, just 17 at the time, met with Charles Moreno, 20, and Kenneth Fleming, 15, intending to sell marijuana. But instead of making a deal, Mitchell forced them to drive to an abandoned house where he robbed them and opened fire. Moreno died. Fleming survived. Just hours later, Mitchell committed a second shooting, killing 18-year-old Hector Manguia during another robbery, all in a single day. 3 victims in less than 24 hours. Later, Mitchell called those actions moments of lost judgment that could never be undone. With 3 lives lost, a death sentence was inevitable. Yet his case became one of the most debated in Texas history, as Mitchell was only 17 when the crimes occurred. When the time came, he became one of the youngest people executed in Texas since the death penalty was reinstated. On October 22, 2001, he was brought into the execution chamber. Unlike others who requested lavish meals, Mitchell asked for only one thing: a bag of Jolly Rancher hard candies. Maybe it was a nod to childhood, or maybe he simply didn't want to ask for anything more. His final words were, "I'm sorry for the pain. I'm sorry for taking your life. I ask for God's forgiveness, and I ask you to forgive me. I know it may be hard, but I'm sorry for what I did." A quiet voice, but within it, real remorse. Mitchell died at 33, carrying with him the shadow of a youth lost long before he ever had the chance to grow up.
12.
Larry Ray Swearingen, Texas. On the night of December 8, 1998, as Montgomery County lay still in the quiet darkness, no one could have predicted the tragedy that was about to unfold. Melissa Trotter, a 19-year-old student at Lone Star College, left campus and headed home, but she never returned. At the time, Larry Ray Swearingen, aged 27, was a man with a history of violent behavior toward women. 25 days later, Trotter's body was discovered in a remote forest in Sam Houston, showing clear signs of strangulation. When the investigation began, physical evidence, such as hair strands and scratches on the victim's body, seemed to point to Swearingen as the culprit. But years later, Swearingen continued to maintain his innocence. A death sentence was handed down to Swearingen, but the pain for the victim's family extended even longer as the appeal process dragged on. Swearingen consistently argued that he had been wrongfully convicted, claiming that there was insufficient evidence to prove he was the killer. On August 21, 2019, Larry Ray Swearingen walked into the execution chamber at Huntsville Prison. Before being administered the lethal injection, Swearingen declined a special last meal, accepting only the standard prison meal of rice, beans, bread, and water. When asked if he had any final words, Swearingen's anger was evident. He said, "I'm innocent. I didn't kill anyone. Today you're killing an innocent man. Thank you, Warden." His final words echoed in the execution chamber like a painful sigh, a tearful declaration from a man who was wrongfully convicted and would never have a chance to make things right. As the poison spread through his body, no one could change the outcome. It was a tragedy not only in the death of one person, but also in the unanswered questions surrounding justice.
13.
Etienne, Shannon Charles Thomas, Texas. On Christmas Eve of 1993, the town of Baytown, on the eastern edge of Houston, lit up with colorful lights. Families gathered. Children counted down the hours until morning, eager to open presents. In one quiet neighborhood, the Rios family was preparing for their own celebration. But what happened that night would leave a mark on the community, a wound that made it impossible to fully enjoy the holidays ever again. Shannon Charles Thomas, along with an accomplice, broke into the home of Roberto Rios, a single father raising his two children, 11-year-old Victor and 10-year-old Maria. What began as a robbery turned into a triple homicide, taking the lives of all three family members. The horror wasn't just in the violence, it was in the innocence of the victims, and in the timing, during what should have been the most sacred night of the year. Thomas was arrested shortly after. The trial moved quickly, ending with a death sentence. But the echoes of that night still linger, not because of how many lives were lost, but because of who they were. On November 16, 2005, Shannon Thomas was led into the execution chamber at Huntsville Prison. He declined to request a final meal, something rarely seen among death row inmates. When asked for final words, he looked through the glass toward the friends and family watching from behind the wall and said softly, "I want everyone to know that I love them. Be strong and move past this. Don't look back. Keep going forward. Love is unconditional, just like Mom always told us. I may not be here in the flesh, but I'll always be with you in spirit." He then closed his eyes. Another Christmas came and went. But that house in Baytown, it would never hear laughter again.
14.
Odell Barnes Jr., Texas, Wichita Falls, winter of 1989. In the quiet home of Helen Bass, a woman was brutally beaten, raped, and then murdered. When neighbors discovered the scene, it haunted the entire neighborhood for years to come. Odell Barnes Jr. was arrested soon after. The evidence against him was overwhelming, from fingerprints on a night lamp, semen at the crime scene, to bloodstains from Helen Bass on his clothes. But this is where the story begins to take a twist. In the years that followed, Barnes maintained his innocence. Human rights activists, lawyers, and even a portion of the public began to question the accuracy of the verdict. Mistakes in evidence collection, hasty prosecution, all became the spark for calls for clemency. Yet, the sentence remained unchanged. On March 1, 2000, Odell Barnes Jr. was executed by lethal injection. His final meal? He chose nothing. No fancy dishes. Barnes simply said he wanted justice, equality, world peace. Simple words, yet their weight carried far beyond the walls of the Walls Unit prison. As the final moment arrived, Barnes looked directly at those witnessing the execution and said, "I want to send my deepest love to my family, my supporters, and my lawyers. They've always been there for me. I thank them for proving my innocence, even though the court never acknowledged it. My life hasn't been easy, but after meeting those who believed in me, I know everything will come to an end. I hope this marks the beginning of better judgments in the future. That's all I want to say." No one knows the full truth. But those words, in a cold room, under the gaze of so many eyes, still echo. They weren't an admission. They weren't a denial. They were simply the words of a man, facing the moment history had decided for him.
15,
Lawrence Russell Brewer, Texas. One night in June of 1998, the small, peaceful town of Jasper, Texas, was dragged back to one of the darkest periods in American history. This wasn't just a murder. It was a living symbol of racial hatred, a brutal act with no mercy. Lawrence Russell Brewer, along with his two accomplices, John William King and Sean Berry, chose James Byrd Jr., a 49-year-old African-American man, as their victim, committing one of the most gruesome crimes Texas had seen in decades. They didn't kill Byrd with a gun. They beat him, then chained him to the back of a pickup truck with a metal chain. They drove down an asphalt road for over 3 miles. His body was dragged, torn apart when it hit a concrete culvert along the roadside. Brewer was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death. While the nation was in shock over the brutality of the crime, Brewer showed no remorse. In multiple interviews, he claimed he felt no regret, stating he was just doing what he believed was right. On the day of his execution, September 21, 2011, Brewer entered the lethal injection chamber. Before that, he requested a feast, as if it were a grand last meal: 2 pieces of fried chicken with gravy and onions, a bacon cheeseburger, scrambled eggs with ground beef and jalapenos, fried okra, 1 pound of buffalo wings, 3 fajitas, a meat lover's pizza, Blue Bell vanilla ice cream, a peanut butter fudge, and 3 root beer bottles. But when the food tray was brought to him, Brewer quietly declined. He simply said, "I'm not hungry." This action stunned the prison guards and led the Texas authorities to make a historic decision. They permanently revoked the privilege of choosing a last meal for all death row inmates in the state. When asked if he had any final words, Brewer just shook his head. "No, I don't have a final statement." No apology. No justification. Not a hint of remorse. His death didn't close the pain in Jasper. And in the history of modern executions, Brewer will forever be remembered as a symbol of extremism, not just in his actions, but in his silence.
16,
Charles Brooks Jr., Texas. On December 14, 1976, in Fort Worth, Texas, a man named David Gregory walked into a garage to fix a customer's car. Just a few minutes later, he was tied up with a coat hanger, his mouth taped shut, and then shot directly in the head. His body was found kneeling, as if an unspoken plea had never been made. Charles Brooks Jr., along with Woody Loudrez, was accused of carrying out the kidnapping and murder. Both denied pulling the trigger. But the court didn't need that. Brooks was sentenced to death in April of 1978, marking his name in U.S. judicial history as the first person to be executed by lethal injection. On December 7, 1982, Charles Brooks was led to the execution chamber. When asked about his last meal, he initially requested fried shrimp and oysters, perhaps recalling a childhood memory or a distant home. But the prison refused. Shellfish weren't on the approved list. In the end, he had a simple meal: a T-bone steak, French fries, ketchup, biscuits, peach pie, and a glass of iced tea. But what's most memorable wasn't the food, but his final words. Charles Brooks didn't cry. He didn't avoid the moment. He lifted his head high and recited the Islamic faith's declaration of belief. "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah. I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Indeed, we belong to Allah and surely we will return to him." He looked toward his family and said, "I love you." As the needle began to administer the drug, he tried to speak one last time. "Allahu Akbar. Allah is the greatest." Brooks passed away peacefully, as if death was something he had prepared for his entire life. No one knows for sure what happens after we close our eyes. But if there is a place for forgiveness, perhaps Brooks found his way there with his final faith.
17th,
Ruben Kantu, Texas. On the night of November 8, 1984, in the Southside neighborhood of San Antonio, Texas, two teenagers snuck through the fence of a construction site. Ruben Kantu, aged 17, and David Garza, aged 15, carried a gun and an unclear intention to rob or to prove something to the world. Inside the unfinished house, two workers were sleeping after a long day. They had nothing of value except their sleep, and after that, one would never wake up. Pedro Gomez was shot dead. Juan Moreno, who survived, carried 2 bullets and a memory that would never fade. It was Moreno's testimony that later became the foundation for Ruben Kantu's death sentence. But time didn't just pass, it exposed cracks. Years after the sentence was carried out, Juan Moreno, the living witness, reversed his original testimony. He said he had been coerced, pressured, and was uncertain that Ruben Kantu was the one who fired the shots. Journalists, lawyers, and even former judges involved in the case began to express doubts about the fairness of the trial. But it was too late. On August 24, 1993, Ruben Kantu, 17 at the time of the crime, 26 at the time of his execution, was injected with lethal drugs at Huntsville Prison, Texas. Before his death, he requested a simple meal: fried chicken and rice. Nothing extravagant, nothing complicated, just like the simplicity of his youth. When asked for his final words, Kantu didn't shy away. He looked straight ahead and said, "I am an innocent man, and something very wrong is taking place tonight." Those words didn't save him, but they didn't fall silent either. They continue to echo in debates about justice, about adolescence, and about the irreversible mistakes of the death penalty system.
18th,
Richard Cartwright, Texas. One night in August of 1996, in Corpus Christi, where the sea breeze usually brings a sense of peace, a meeting that was supposed to be consensual turned into a deadly trap. Richard Cartwright, along with 2 others, Dennis Haygood and Kelly Overstreet, planned to rob Nick Morida, a 37-year-old man. They lured him to a secluded park, where only dim streetlights and the sound of wind through dry branches filled the air. When Morida arrived, Cartwright drew a gun, Overstreet held a knife to his neck, and everything happened in seconds. The victim tried to run, but a bullet in his back and a stab wound ended his life. Death came quickly, but the consequences lasted for decades. Haygood and Overstreet chose to testify against Cartwright in exchange for lighter sentences. Cartwright was sentenced to death. Years later, public opinion began to question, who was the real shooter? Was it Cartwright, or was he just the last one left to take the blame? On May 19, 2005, Cartwright entered the execution chamber. His last meal, surrounded by concrete walls and barbed wire, was almost a feast: fried chicken, a cheese sandwich, fried onions, French fries, bacon, sausage, cheesecake, and a cinnamon roll. A meal that was both a symphony of flavors and a farewell to life's simplest joys. Before leaving the world, Cartwright spoke slowly. "I want to apologize to the victim's family for any pain and suffering I have caused. I love my family and friends, and I thank them for their support." A late apology, one that couldn't bring the victim back, but was enough to remind us, though guilt is real, the person behind the crime can still express regret.
19th,
Ignacio Quavvis, Texas. On July 24, 1974, within the solid walls of the Huntsville prison in Texas, a tense 11-day riot erupted. Ignacio Quavvis, along with 2 other inmates, Fred Carrasco and Rodolfo Dominguez, plotted an audacious escape, taking 11 staff members and 4 fellow prisoners hostage. The standoff between them and the authorities lasted almost 2 weeks, with dozens of negotiations and escalating tension every hour. When the escape attempt occurred on August 3rd, the plan failed. 2 female hostages, Yvonne Basita and Julia Standley, lost their lives. Quavvis' 2 accomplices died in the chaos. Quavvis was the only one who survived. He was tried and sentenced to death for his direct involvement in the death of Julia Standley, a dedicated prison staff member. The case shocked both the prison system and the public, highlighting the risks involved in managing prison security. On May 23, 1991, Ignasio Quavvis was executed at the very place the riot had taken place. His last meal was a traditional southern dish: fried chicken and dumplings, steamed rice, sliced bread, black beans, and iced tea. Simple, yet filled with deep meaning. Before he left, Quavvis said briefly, "I'm going to a beautiful place." "All right, Warden, let's begin." No resentment. No defense. Just a man at peace with his final moment.
20th,
Ombberto Leo Garcia, Texas, San Antonio, May of 1994. A teenage party ended with the disappearance of Adria Sauceda, a 16-year-old girl. She was taken by Ombberto Leo Garcia, someone she knew. But Adria never returned. Her body was found in a tragic state at a remote location. The police began an investigation, and Leo quickly became the prime suspect. Forensic evidence supported the accusations. Leo was arrested and sentenced to death. However, the case sparked international controversy when Leo, a Mexican citizen, was not informed of his right to consular access as outlined by the Vienna Convention. The Mexican government, several human rights organizations, and even the International Court of Justice voiced their opposition to the execution. Despite this, the Texas court upheld the verdict. On July 7, 2011, Ombberto Leo Garcia was executed by lethal injection at Huntsville. Before his execution, he requested a meal that reflected his homeland: fried chicken, pico de gallo, tacos, fried okra, and 2 cans of Coca-Cola. A simple choice, but one rich in symbolism. In his final moments, Leo gave his last words: "I've hurt so many people. Let this end. I take full responsibility. I'm sorry and I ask for forgiveness. I truly am sorry. Viva Mexico. Viva Mexico. I'm ready, Warden. Let's begin." A farewell to all, to the victim, to his loved ones, and to those who tried to prevent the irreversible.
21st,
Johnny Frank Garrett, Texas. On the early morning of October 31st, 1981, Amarillo, Texas greeted Halloween with a chill in the air. But instead of children in costumes knocking on doors for candy, the residents near St. Francis Monastery were shocked by a tragic news. An elderly nun had been murdered inside the very place once known for its peacefulness. Johnny Frank Garrett, just 17 years old, lived right across from the monastery. He was accused of breaking in that morning. Investigators found evidence at the scene that matched Garrett, leading to his arrest on November 9th of that year. From start to finish, the case divided public opinion. Some believed Garrett was the perpetrator, while many others, including human rights activists, argued that he was a victim of pressure and legal mishandling. Garrett had a history of mental instability and grew up under difficult conditions, which some experts claimed hadn't been fully considered during the trial. On February 11, 1992, Johnny Frank Garrett was executed by lethal injection. He became one of the youngest inmates to be executed in modern Texas history. The final meal Garrett chose was a single item: ice cream. It wasn't a grand request, but rather a choice that evoked memories of a stolen childhood. Before the injection, Garrett left a message recorded by the media: "I want to thank my family for loving and caring for me. As for the rest of the world, they can keep their opinions to themselves." A final statement that didn't seek peace, but wasn't entirely angry either. Just the voice of a young person, lost in the middle of a never-ending debate.
22nd,
James Emory Pastor, Texas. From October of 1980 to early 1981, a series of serious crimes in Texas shook the community. James Emory Pastor, along with 2 others, Stephen McCoy and Gary LeBlanc, was accused of being behind at least 3 deliberate murders. The first victim was Robert Edward Howard, a man targeted in a contract killing tied to a family dispute. The subsequent cases were identified as having mixed motives, from theft to organized violence. In all 3 cases, the damage done to the victims' families was immeasurable. Pastor, accused of either directly carrying out or playing a significant role in each crime, was eventually tried and sentenced to death. On September 20, 1989, after many years of imprisonment, the sentence was carried out. James Emory Pastor walked into the execution chamber without offering any statement. Silent, from start to finish. His last meal consisted of a steak, fresh salad, French fries, and a serving of watermelon. A simple meal, yet filled with the essence of the everyday, something he perhaps hadn't touched in a long time. No final words. No apology. No explanation. Just the steady hum of the air conditioner and his final empty gaze as time came to its end.
23rd.
Stephen Albert McCoy, Texas. In the mid-1980s, amid a series of crimes that rocked Texas, the name Stephen Albert McCoy appeared alongside James Pastor and Gary LeBlanc, three companions in the chaotic days that led to irreversible consequences. In the case of Cynthia Darlene Johnson, investigators concluded that McCoy and his accomplices had planned to approach the young woman, then abduct and cause her death. It wasn't just a murder, but a wake-up call about the danger posed by individuals society thought it had under control. Stephen McCoy was sentenced to death. But his execution would become memorable, not because of the crime, but because of how the sentence was carried out. On May 24, 1989, McCoy was brought to the lethal injection room at Huntsville Prison. However, the process didn't go smoothly. When the drugs were administered, his body reacted strongly, with many witnesses considering it one of the most awkward executions of its time, even though officials stated that there was no technical error. The last meal McCoy requested was a simple one: a cheese sandwich, French fries, and a strawberry milkshake, like the meal many choose in their youth, before everything went off track. No final words. No farewell. No defense. McCoy left in silence, a heavy silence that wasn't easily forgotten.
24th.
Kenneth McDuff, Texas. On August 6, 1966, in Everman, Texas, a summer evening became the first crack in the violent life of Kenneth McDuff. He and Roy Dale Green were accused of kidnapping 3 teenagers. 2 of them would never return. The third, a girl, became the symbol of a shocking case at the time. McDuff was sentenced to death in 1968. But that verdict was overturned in 1972 after the U.S. Supreme Court suspended the death penalty nationwide, changing his sentence to life imprisonment. Many years later, in a controversial move, McDuff was granted parole and released. Sadly, instead of turning his life around, he returned to the darkness. From 1989 to 1992, investigators alleged that McDuff continued his crimes, targeting vulnerable women in various locations. The suspicions, the unsolved cases, and the social scars he left were nearly impossible to erase. In 1992, he was arrested again. And this time, Texas wasn't going to give him a second chance. On November 17, 1998, Kenneth McDuff was executed. His last meal, 2 well-done T-bone steaks, with all the side dishes available, a feast that many viewed as the last supper of his years of freedom. McDuff's last words were recorded briefly: "I'm ready to be released. Release me." A statement that left listeners puzzled. Was it freedom of the mind, or just a final plea for himself? McDuff left behind a lasting impression, not just because of his crimes, but because of the unanswered question: can the system ever predict what happens when forgiveness is granted?
25th.
Eliso Moreno, Texas. On the morning of October 11, 1983, the western suburbs of Houston awoke to a chain of horrific events that lasted for hours. Eliso Moreno, in an agitated and uncontrollable state, began a journey filled with blood and tragedy, leaving behind 6 victims at various locations. Among the victims were his wife and brother-in-law, those closest to him. He then went on to take the life of a highway patrol officer on duty, and 3 elderly strangers in Hempstead, victims who, by chance, became part of a series of uncontrollable actions. As the chaos didn't end, Moreno kidnapped a stranger's family, demanding they take him to Pasadena. It was a desperate journey for a man who could no longer escape the turmoil within his mind. He was arrested while traveling south with another hostage, stopped at a checkpoint in Wharton County. Texas was shaken, partly because of the number of victims, partly because of the incomprehensible nature of the acts, as if he were fleeing from himself, not the police. On March 4, 1987, Eliso Moreno was executed by lethal injection. His last meal was a traditional Mexican dish: 4 cheese enchiladas, 2 fish cakes, French fries with ketchup, a glass of milk, and a slice of lemon cake. As he entered the final room, Moreno said, "The Lord's word says the consequence of sin is death." I am ready to pay the price according to the law. A statement of acceptance, neither tragic nor evasive, as if he had known all along that everything would return to its origin. Silence.
26th,
Stephen Peter Morin, Texas. If there were a map marking unsolved cases across the United States from the late 1960s to the early 1980s, the name Stephen Peter Morin would likely appear in most corners of that map. Morin wasn't just a criminal. He was a moving enigma, continuously moving between states, Nevada, Colorado, Texas, with multiple aliases and different identities. Morin was suspected of being involved in over 40 murders. Most of the victims were women and teenagers. But the exact number remains a question mark, as Morin left behind a network that was obscure, tangled, and filled with gaps in the investigative records. He was arrested in the early 1980s and sentenced to death in both Colorado and Texas. However, after abandoning his right to appeal, Morin was executed in Texas. On March 13, 1985, at Huntsville Prison, he was served a simple yet complete last meal: a T-bone steak, baked potatoes with butter, sweet green peas, a dinner roll, banana pudding, and a cup of coffee. Nothing more than a Sunday family dinner from a long gone past. But what made Stephen Morin's execution memorable wasn't the meal, it was his final words. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this time, for those who have walked with me, for the family and faith who have come to my side. Let your Holy Spirit pour over me, as I know your love has always surrounded me. Forgive them, for they know not what they do, as I know you have forgiven me, as I have forgiven them. I commend my soul to you. I praise you and thank you. It was no longer a deathbed confession, it was a ritual, an offering. No matter who Morin had been, what he had done, in that moment, he didn't speak of sin. He spoke of forgiveness. And then, the room returned to silence, where the end of a long journey finally arrived.
27th,
Eric Charles Nino, Texas. On March 23, 1995, in Hockley, Texas, a small community was enveloped by a pain that couldn't be named. Nicole Benton, a 7-year-old girl, was last seen playing near her home. A few hours later, she disappeared without a trace. Eric Charles Nino, a neighbor living nearby, initially wasn't a suspect. But the silence and conflicting details in his statement began to reveal a chilling truth. After hours of questioning, Nino admitted to luring the girl into his house and committing the crime. The police later found her body hidden in the attic. Texas was an outrage. The case became a symbol of irreversible mistakes, and also a reminder of the fragility of safety, even in the quietest neighborhoods. Nino was sentenced to death shortly after. During his time awaiting execution, he showed cooperation, with no appeals and no justifications. It was said that he spent his final years writing letters of apology to the victim's family, but nothing could truly make up for the loss. On October 28, 2008, Eric Nino was executed by lethal injection. His last meal was simple: a grilled cheese sandwich, 4 fish cakes, 6 boiled eggs, and a cup of coffee. When asked if he had any final words, he simply replied, "No, Warden." No explanation. No last statement. Just silence, as if he understood that, at this point, every word had come too late.
28th,
James Edward Smith, Texas. On the afternoon of March 7, 1983, downtown Houston became chaotic when an armed robbery took place at the Union National Life Insurance Company office. James Edward Smith, in an attempt to carry out the heist, shot and killed 44-year-old area manager Larry Don Rojas. Smith was arrested shortly after. The victim's family described Larry as a gentleman, always prioritizing his work and family responsibilities. His sudden death left a great loss not only for his family but also for the community he lived in. During the trial, Smith claimed that he wasn't fully in control of his actions at the time of the crime. He frequently mentioned his spiritual beliefs and the influence of voodoo practices, an aspect that complicated the case in the eyes of the public. On June 26, 1990, James Edward Smith was executed by lethal injection at Huntsville Prison. What made him memorable was not just the crime, but his unusual last meal request: a handful of Riacunda soil, sacred earth used in voodoo rituals. The prison refused the request, as soil was not considered food, and Smith did not choose an alternative. When asked for his final words, He didn't give a long statement. The only words recorded were, Hare Krishna. A religious chant, like a final prayer for his soul, not a justification, but perhaps a way to depart in peace, according to his own beliefs.
29th,
Carla Fay Tucker, Texas. On the night of June 13, 1983, in Houston, Texas, Carla Fay Tucker and her boyfriend Daniel Garrett broke into the apartment of Jerry Lynn Dean to rob him. But the situation escalated. Dean was murdered, and a woman named Deborah Thornton, who was present at the apartment at the time, also tragically lost her life. Tucker was arrested shortly thereafter. At the time of her trial, she was just 23, a woman with a troubled childhood, raised amid drugs, violence, and uncertainty. However, what divided public opinion was not the crime, but the transformation in Tucker's soul during her time on death row. In the years leading up to her execution, Carla Fay Tucker publicly renounced her past, embraced Christianity, and became a model of rehabilitation in prison. She received rare support from religious groups, human rights organizations, and even several politicians. Letters requesting clemency from the governor of Texas were written with both reason and tears. However, the death sentence was still carried out on February 3, 1998. She became the first woman to be executed in Texas in over 130 years. Her last meal was unusually simple: a banana, a peach, and a salad with ranch dressing. No frills. No special requests. It was as if she had let go of everything belonging to the old world. When asked if she had anything to say, Carla gently turned to the families of the victims and said, "Yes, sir, I would like to say to all of you, the Thornton family and Jerry Dean's family, that I am so sorry. I hope God will give you peace with this." An apology without justification. No blame. Just the remorse of a woman who did not deny her past, but spent the rest of her life asking for the opportunity to be forgiven.
30th,
James Autry, Texas. On the afternoon of April 20th, 1980, the air in Port Arthur, Texas, seemed to stop after 3 gunshots. In a small convenience store, a life was taken over a 6-pack of beer. James Autry, 29 years old, entered the counter intending to steal the beer without paying. When the store clerk, Shirley Druitt, reminded him, he drew his gun and fired without hesitation. Shirley collapsed on the spot. But Autry's rage didn't end there. A few minutes later, he returned to the scene, this time not to escape, but to silence any remaining witnesses. Joseph Broussard, a former Catholic priest, and Athanasius Svarnas, a Greek sailor, became the next targets. Broussard died instantly. Svarnas survived but carried permanent brain damage, a living memory, smoldering and painful for the rest of his life. James Autry was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death. Throughout the trial, he showed no remorse. For those who knew him, this was not surprising. But for the community, for the families of the victims, it was a deep wound in the trust of safety in a town that seemed so peaceful. On March 14, 1984, James Autry entered the execution chamber. As one of the first in Texas to be executed by lethal injection, a new method considered more humane, but for the victims, no method could erase the pain. His last meal: a hamburger, French fries, and a bottle of Dr. Pepper. A simple meal, as if trying to evoke something normal, when everything had already crossed the line. When asked for his final words, he did not answer. No apology. No justification. Just silence, heavy and absolute.
31st, Abel Revel Ochoa, Dallas. On an August afternoon in 2002, inside a small house on Salerno Street in the Oak Cliff neighborhood, a family tragedy unfolded. It shocked the entire community. Abel Revel Ochoa, 29 years old, shot and killed 5 members of his own family. The victims were his wife, 2 daughters, father-in-law, and sister-in-law. Another sister-in-law was seriously wounded but survived. Ochoa was born in Vicente Guerrero, Mexico. He moved to Texas as a child and became a U.S. citizen. He had worked as a heavy equipment operator and had no criminal record, but around the year 2000, he became addicted to crack cocaine. He tried many times to quit but failed. On August 4th, 2002, the family attended church together, afterward. Ochoa convinced his wife to give him $10 to buy drugs. He smoked crack in the backyard, then felt a powerful craving. Knowing his wife wouldn't give him more money, he grabbed a loaded 9mm Ruger handgun. He walked into the living room where his family was gathered and opened fire. His wife, Cecilia, 32, daughters Crystal, age 7, and Anahi, just 9 months old, were killed. So were his father-in-law Bartolo Alviso, 56, and sister-in-law Jacqueline Sala, 20. Another sister-in-law, Alma Alviso, 27, was severely injured. She survived after 3 months of medical care. After the shooting, Ochoa took his wife's ATM card and drove to a nearby mall. He tried to withdraw money but failed. He was arrested at the scene. At trial, Ochoa pled guilty. He claimed drugs had clouded his mind, but the jury was not convinced. On April 23, 2003, he was sentenced to death. Ochoa spent nearly 17 years on death row. He expressed deep regret and turned to faith before his execution on February 6, 2020. His final words were, "I want to thank God, my Father, Jesus Christ, for saving and changing my life. I'm sorry to my wife's family for causing this pain. I love you like the sisters I never had. Thank you for forgiving me." Ochoa's case is a grim reminder of how drugs and domestic violence can destroy families. It also raises questions about redemption and forgiveness in the justice system. 32nd, John William Hummel. Kennedale is a quiet suburb outside Fort Worth, Texas. But in December 2009, a horrific family tragedy shattered that peace. John William Hummel, a former U.S. Marine, murdered his pregnant wife, 5-year-old daughter, and wheelchair-bound father-in-law. The case shocked the entire public. Hummel worked as a hospital security guard. He lived with his wife Joy, daughter Jody, and father-in-law Clyde Bedford. He had no history of violence, but his life began to fall apart after he started an affair with a married woman. When he learned his wife was pregnant, he decided to kill his family and start over with his lover. On the night of December 17, 2009, Hummel attacked his wife with a blunt object. He then used brutal force on his daughter and father-in-law. After the murders, he set the house on fire to destroy the evidence. But investigators quickly discovered the truth. The victims had been beaten to death before the fire. At first, Hummel denied everything, but after being caught near the California-Mexico border, he confessed. In 2011, Hummel was sentenced to death for murdering his wife and father-in-law. One detail sparked controversy. His defense attorney later became a prosecutor in the same office that charged him. That raised concerns about a conflict of interest. Hummel's execution was delayed in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but it was carried out on June 30, 2021. His final words were, "I truly regret killing my family. Thank you for all the prayers for my family over the past few days. I love every one of you." His case raises painful questions about the mental toll of war, the support systems for veterans, and how the justice system treats those with a military past. It also forces us to ask, how can a father, a husband, turn so brutally against the people he once vowed to protect? 33rd, Rick Allen Rhodes, Pasadena, Texas. In September of 1991, just one day after being released from prison, 27-year-old Rick Allen Rhodes committed a brutal double murder. He took the lives of two brothers, Charles and Bradley Allen, in their own home, their Sierra. The case shook the local community and became one of the most disturbing crimes in Texas criminal justice history. Rhodes had a criminal record for burglary and theft. He was released on September 12, 1991, instead of reporting to a halfway house as required. He took a bus to Houston and wandered around his old neighborhood. In the early hours of September 13th, he encountered Charles Allen outside his home. after a heated argument. Rhodes followed Charles inside. There, he attacked him with a metal rod and a knife. When Bradley Allen heard the noise and tried to intervene, Rhodes assaulted him too. After the killings, Rhodes fled. He took the victims' money and clothing. The brothers' bodies were discovered the next morning. The scene horrified the community. At first, police had no leads, but weeks later, Rhodes was arrested for breaking into an elementary school. During questioning, he confessed to the murders. He claimed he acted in self-defense. In his 1992 trial, Rhodes was sentenced to death for murder, over nearly 3 decades on death row. His lawyers filed multiple appeals. One argued that racial bias tainted the jury selection. All appeals were denied. On September 28, 2021, Rhodes was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville prison. He declined to give any final statement. Family members of the victims, including Bradley Allen's daughter, were present. She said witnessing Rhodes' death brought a sense of justice. The case of Rick Allen Rhodes is a stark reminder of the dangers of repeat offenses and the gaps in post-release supervision. It also raises questions about rehabilitation and re-entry for serious offenders. 34th, Carl Wayne Buntian, Houston, June of 1990. A routine evening turned into tragedy when police officer James Irby, 37 years old, was shot and killed during a traffic stop. The shooter was Carl Wayne Buntian, a 46-year-old man with a long criminal history. He had just been released after serving 13 months of a 15-year sentence for sexually assaulting a child. On June 27, 1990, Officer Irby pulled over a vehicle for a traffic violation. As he spoke with the driver, Buntian, who was in the passenger seat, suddenly stepped out. At close range, he opened fire. When Irby fell, Buntian continued shooting from behind. He then fled the scene, firing at bystanders and attempting to steal a car. He was caught in a nearby building shortly after. Buntian had a violent past. Born in 1944 in Harris County, Texas, he grew up in an abusive home. His father had committed murder and often beat his family. Buntian himself suffered broken bones from the abuse. He began committing crimes in 1961, including theft, drug possession, and assault. In 1971, his twin brother was killed by police in a shootout. Buntian was believed to have sworn revenge. In 1991, Buntian was sentenced to death, but in 2009, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned the sentence. They ruled the jury hadn't heard key mitigating evidence. In 2012, he was sentenced to death again, over more than 30 years on death row. Buntian had only 3 disciplinary actions. The last, in 1999, his lawyers argued that he was no longer a threat, and that executing an elderly reformed man was inhumane, but all requests for clemency were denied. On April 21, 2022, Buntian was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville prison. He became the oldest inmate ever executed in Texas. His final words were, "I want the Irby family to know that I truly regret what happened. I pray they find peace." Outside the prison, dozens of officers and former officers gathered. Many revved their motorcycle engines to honor their fallen brother. Buntian's case raises hard questions about justice, forgiveness, and whether the death penalty should be applied to elderly inmates. It also reminds us of the lasting pain violent crimes bring to families and communities. 35th, Kusul Chanthakumane, McKinney, Texas. In July of 2006, on a sweltering summer day, 40-year-old real estate agent Sarah Walker was found brutally murdered inside a model home she was showing. The case quickly drew public attention due to its violence and the controversy surrounding the death sentence given to Kusul Chanthakumane, who was convicted of the crime. Kusul, born in 1980, was the son of Laotian refugees who came to the United States after the Vietnam War. He had a prior conviction for kidnapping and robbery in North Carolina and was on parole when he moved to Texas. On the day of the murder, Kossel claimed his car had broken down, and he entered the model home to ask for water. However, his DNA was found at the scene, including under the victim's fingernails and on other surfaces. A bite mark on Sarah's neck was also said to match his teeth. But the investigation and trial drew heavy criticism. The bite mark analysis and testimony from hypnotized witnesses were seen as unreliable and outdated by modern forensic standards. Kossel's lawyers argued that the DNA could have been transferred without direct contact, and that the forensic methods used were flawed. Still, courts upheld the death sentence. On August 17, 2022, Kossel was executed at the Huntsville prison before the lethal injection. He thanked God, his pastors, and those who had supported him through his journey. He said, "I pray that my death brings peace to the Walker family." But at his request, a Buddhist monk placed his hand on Kossel's chest and read scripture as the drugs began to flow. Kossel looked through the glass at his mother and said, "Mom, I love you." He was pronounced dead at 6:33 p.m. Notably, the victim's father, Joseph Walker, publicly forgave Kossel and opposed his execution. He said, "I hold no hatred toward him. I didn't want him to be put to death." 36th, John Henry Ramirez, Corpus Christi, Texas, in 2004, on a humid summer night. 46-year-old convenience store worker Pablo Castro was taking out the trash after his shift. He was suddenly attacked. John Henry Ramirez, then 20 years old, had been on a 3-day binge of drugs and alcohol. He stabbed Pablo multiple times and stole just $1.25. After the murder, Ramirez fled to Mexico and lived in hiding for 4 years before being captured and extradited to Texas in 2008. Ramirez was sentenced to death, but his case became the center of a national legal battle. He requested that his pastor be allowed to lay hands on him and pray aloud during his execution. Texas denied the request, which led to the case Ramirez versus Collier. In March of 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Ramirez's favor, affirming the religious rights of inmates during execution. On October 5, 2022, Ramirez was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville prison before his death. He apologized to the victim's family. "I have regret and remorse. This was a heinous act. I hope this brings you comfort." He also addressed his loved ones. "I fought the good fight, and I'm ready to go." Pastor Dana Moore, who had guided Ramirez spiritually, placed his hand on Ramirez's chest and prayed, "Grant John peace. Grant all of us peace." Ramirez's death not only closed a murder case, it opened deep questions about justice, forgiveness, and religious freedom. The documentary I Am Ready, Warden, nominated for an Oscar in 2025, chronicled Ramirez's final days and his search for redemption. In a rare moment where law, faith, and humanity met, Ramirez left this world with a prayer on his lips and his pastor's hand over his heart, a haunting end to a tragic life. 37th, Tracy Lane Beatty, White House, a small town in East Texas. In November of 2003, 62-year-old Carolyn Click was found dead and buried in the backyard of her mobile home. The killer was her own son, Tracy Lane Beatty, who had recently been released from prison for assaulting a child. The relationship between Beatty and his mother had long been strained and violent. Neighbors said Carolyn had once been beaten so badly by her son that she was believed to be dead. Still, she hoped for reconciliation and allowed him to move in with her in October of 2003. But just 1 month later, tensions rose again. On November 25th, Carolyn told neighbors she had asked her son to leave. That was the last time she was seen alive. Beatty later admitted that. After drinking alcohol, he and his mother argued, he strangled her to death, He then buried her in the backyard and used her credit card to buy drugs and alcohol. At his 2004 trial, he was sentenced to death for committing murder during the course of a theft. His defense argued that he had lived with his mother and had no intent to steal. Over the years, Beatty and his attorneys filed many appeals. They claimed he was mentally ill and not fit for execution. Mental health experts said Beatty suffered from complex delusions. He believed people were torturing him through a device implanted in his ear, but courts refused to allow a full psychiatric evaluation, citing safety concerns about removing his handcuffs. On November 9, 2022, Beatty was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville prison before his death. He spoke to his wife, "I don't want to leave you. I'll see you on the other side. I love you." He also thanked his fellow inmates and said, "I've made peace with the Almighty." Beatty's case is a tragic story of a broken family, torn apart by violence and addiction. It also raises questions about how the justice system handles offenders with mental illness, and whether true justice can be served when these factors go unaddressed. 38. Stephen Dale Barbie, Fort Worth, Texas. In February of 2005, Lisa Underwood, a 34-year-old bakery owner, was more than 7 months pregnant. She and her 7-year-old son Jaden vanished just before a baby shower planned by her friends. Police found blood in Lisa's home, but there were no signs of forced entry. Her vehicle was later discovered abandoned in a creek. The windows were down, and a bottle of cleaning solution was found in the trunk. Stephen Barbie, 37 years old, a successful businessman and Lisa's former boyfriend, became the prime suspect. Barbie initially confessed. He said he was afraid his wife would find out about the affair and the unborn child, so he killed Lisa and Jaden to keep it secret. Later, he recanted the confession, claiming it was coerced and blaming his business partner. Despite his claims, the bodies of Lisa and Jaden were found in a shallow grave in Denton County, linking Barbie directly to the crime. His trial lasted just 3 days. In 2006, he was sentenced to death. Over the following years, Barbie filed several appeals. He argued that his attorney had admitted guilt on his behalf without his consent, and that his physical condition made execution cruel. Barbie had limited mobility in his arms and shoulders, which made it hard to lie flat for the injection. Despite this, his appeals were denied during the execution. It took longer than usual to find a suitable vein, and the process lasted over an hour. On November 16, 2022, Barbie was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville prison. His final words were, "I just want everyone to have peace in their hearts, do everything for the glory of God. I'm ready." And he did not mention Lisa or Jaden, and never looked toward the victim's family, who watched from behind the glass. Barbie's case is a heartbreaking reminder of how fear and deceit can lead to the loss of innocent lives. It also raises concerns about how the legal system treats physically impaired inmates and whether executions respect religious and medical needs. 39. Robert Allen Frada, Atascocita, Texas. In November of 1994, 33-year-old Farah Frata was shot and killed in her garage after returning home from a date. The case drew immediate attention when the main suspect turned out to be her ex-husband, Robert Allen Frata, a former Missouri City police officer. Frata and Farah were locked in a bitter divorce and custody battle over their 3 young children, according to court records. Frata told friends he wanted his wife dead so he could avoid paying child support and win custody. He hired Joseph Pristash as a middleman, who then recruited 18-year-old Howard Guidry as the gunman. Guidry shot Farah twice in the head as she stepped out of her car. Meanwhile, Frata created an alibi by taking his children to church. The case stalled until Guidry was arrested for an unrelated bank robbery. The gun found in his backpack was linked to the murder. Pristash's girlfriend also came forward, revealing details of the murder-for-hire plot. All 3 were arrested. In 1996, Prata was sentenced to death. That sentence was overturned in 2007 due to procedural issues, but he was retried and sentenced to death again in 2009. For nearly 30 years on death row, Prata maintained his innocence and challenged the use of expired drugs in executions. All appeals were denied. On January 10, 2023, Prata was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville prison. He made no final statement and didn't look toward the victim's family. His eldest son and Farah's brother were present for the execution. Andy Kahan, representing Crime Stoppers of Houston, called Prata a coward for refusing to admit guilt or offer any apology. Prata's case is a clear example of cold, calculated murder driven by personal gain. It also shows the persistence of the justice system in carrying out a sentence, even if it takes nearly 3 decades. 40th, Wesley Lynn Ruiz, Dallas, Texas. In March of 2007, a red and gray 1996 Chevrolet Caprice with tinted windows and chrome rims drew the attention of police. It was suspected to be linked to a homicide. When spotted, the driver, 27-year-old Wesley Lynn Ruiz, fled, triggering a high-speed chase through city streets. The pursuit ended when Ruiz lost control and crashed into an embankment. Dallas police officer Mark Nix, 33, a U.S. Navy veteran, approached the vehicle and struck the passenger window with his baton, demanding Ruiz surrender. As Nix made a small opening in the glass, Ruiz fired a single shot from inside. The bullet struck Nix's badge, shattered, and a fragment caused fatal injuries. He died at the hospital shortly afterward. Ruiz was arrested at the scene. With the weapon resting on his lap, he claimed self-defense, saying he thought police were shooting at him. But the jury rejected this. In 2008, he was sentenced to death for capital murder. During his time on death row, Ruiz and his attorneys filed several appeals. They argued that racial bias influenced the jury and that an expert witness gave false testimony about Ruiz's risk of future violence. The courts dismissed these claims, citing procedural grounds. On February 1, 2023, Ruiz was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville prison. In his final words, he said, "I'm sorry to Mark and the Nix family for taking him from you. I hope this brings you comfort." He thanked his family and friends and told his children, "Stand tall and keep making me proud."
We've just walked through stories that are as haunting as they are final. Stories of people who reach the end of their lives with a last meal and a final sentence. Their crimes are beyond forgiveness. Yet in those last moments, stripped of control, stripped of violence, each of them stood exposed, silent, waiting. Some apologized. Some said nothing. Some looked to God. But every one of them left behind the same lingering question. Can justice truly heal? And is death really the end of a cycle of brokenness? There's no easy answer. Only the lessons left behind for the living and for a system constantly balancing between law and conscience. If you found this video compelling and want to explore more controversial cases, the lives of death row inmates and dramatic moments inside the justice system, don't forget to hit subscribe and like so you never miss what's next. Share your thoughts in the comments. Did you feel any empathy? Or do you see these stories in a different light? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.